Picture this: the most powerful empire the world has ever known brought to its knees by a gladiator. Not a general, not a king, a slave. For 2 years, Rome couldn't sleep, because somewhere in the mountains of southern Italy, a man they had bought and sold like cattle was building an army that would shake the foundations of their entire civilization. This is the story of Spartacus. But forget everything you think you know from the movies. This isn't a tale of noble heroism and clear-cut victories. This is darker, messier, and infinitely more human than Hollywood ever dared to show you. Because the real Spartacus didn't just fight Rome, he exposed the brutal machinery that powered the ancient world's greatest superpower, and in doing so, he created a nightmare that Roman mothers would use to frighten their children for generations. If you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more stories like this, and drop a comment to tell me where you're listening from. I love knowing that we're exploring these dark secrets of history together, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity. Now, let's return to the story. To understand why Spartacus matters, you first need to understand what he was up against. And I'm not talking about legions or tactics. I'm talking about an entire economic system built on human suffering, an industrial complex of slavery so vast and so brutal that it would make your stomach turn. In 73 BCE, the Roman Republic is at its zenith. But here's what they don't tell you in the history books. Rome's glory is built on the backs of millions of slaves. Not thousands. Millions. 1 in every 3 people in Italy is enslaved. In Rome itself, the ratio is even worse. These aren't domestic servants. These are human machines. In the silver mines of Spain, slaves work until they collapse from exhaustion, their lungs filling with toxic dust. In the wheat fields of Sicily, they labour under overseers who carry whips and brands. And in the gladiatorial schools scattered across Italy, men are trained to kill each other for entertainment. The Romans have perfected something terrifying. They've turned human beings into a renewable resource. When a slave dies, you buy another. When a gladiator falls in the arena, 50 more are waiting. The system is so efficient, so normalised, that most Romans don't even question it. It's just the way the world works. But systems have breaking points, and in 73 BCE, that breaking point has a name. Capua. A wealthy city about 120 miles south of Rome. It's famous for 2 things: its wine and its gladiators. Here, in a building that's part prison, part military camp, and part slaughterhouse, sits the Ludus of Lentulus Batiatus, one of the most prestigious gladiatorial schools in Italy. Understand what a ludus really is. This isn't a gym. This is a place where human beings are systematically brutalized and trained to commit spectacular violence. The men here sleep in underground cells. They're chained at night. They're fed just enough to maintain muscle mass. They exist for one purpose: to die entertainingly. Among these men is Spartacus. We don't know exactly how he got here. The ancient sources are frustratingly vague. We know he was Thracian, from the wild regions north of Greece. Some sources say he once served as a Roman auxiliary soldier and deserted. Others claim he was captured as a prisoner of war. The truth? He was probably sold into slavery after being taken prisoner during one of Rome's endless military campaigns in the Balkans. What we do know is this: Spartacus is dangerous. Not just physically, though he's clearly a formidable fighter, but intellectually. He understands tactics, he can lead, and most importantly, he can inspire. The ludus operates on terror and broken spirits. Batiatus, the lanista who owns these men, has a simple philosophy: beat them until they are afraid to hope. Most gladiators accept their fate. They fight when told, they die when scheduled. They become what Rome wants them to be, spectacular victims. But Spartacus watches. He observes the guards' routines. He notes which walls are weakest. He identifies which men among the gladiators still have fire in their eyes, and he waits. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that your life has an expiration date, that you might be sent into the arena tomorrow, next week, next month, but inevitably you're going there. And once you step onto that sand, the math is simple. Win, and you buy yourself a little more time in hell. Lose, and you die, while thousands of Romans cheer. Now imagine doing that not for glory, not for honour, but for the amusement of the same people who enslaved you. This is the reality of gladiatorial life that the movies sanitize. Yes, successful gladiators could become famous. Yes, some earned enough to eventually buy their freedom. But the vast majority, they died young and terrified, bleeding out in the sand while crowds ate honey cakes and placed bets on the next match. Spring 73 BCE. Something shifts in the ludus. Maybe there's a particularly brutal punishment. Maybe Batiatus has been pushing too hard. Maybe it's just that Spartacus has finally identified enough allies, enough desperate men willing to risk everything for even the slimmest chance at freedom. The historical record gives us this. Spartacus and approximately 78 other gladiators stage a breakout. They don't have weapons. They're not allowed weapons inside the ludus. So they arm themselves with kitchen implements, cooking knives, meat cleavers, skewers. Think about that. 78 trained fighters decide they'd rather die fighting free than live one more day in chains. They know the odds. If they're captured, they'll be crucified. One of the most agonizing deaths imaginable, designed specifically to terrorize others into obedience. They break out anyway. The guards are overwhelmed. They never expected resistance at this scale. The gladiators fight their way out of the compound and into the streets of Capua. In the chaos, they raid a wagon carrying gladiatorial equipment, and suddenly they have real weapons, swords, shields, armor. And then Spartacus makes a decision that will change everything. Instead of scattering, instead of running in every direction to maximize individual survival, he keeps them together. They move as a unit. They head for the countryside. The slave revolt that will bring Rome to its knees has begun. Here's where the story gets truly extraordinary. Within weeks, Spartacus's force of 78 escaped gladiators grows to thousands, then tens of thousands. Eventually, ancient sources claim his army reaches 120,000 strong. How? Because Italy is a powder keg waiting for a spark. Remember, 1 in 3 people in Italy is enslaved. They work the farms, the mines, the workshops. They've been beaten, branded, and broken. They've watched family members sold away. They live without rights, without hope, without anything resembling human dignity. And now, suddenly, there's an army of former slaves who not only escaped, but won. Who fought trained Roman soldiers and lived. Who are growing stronger every day. The word spreads like wildfire through the slave quarters and chain gangs. Spartacus's camp becomes a magnet. Agricultural slaves flee the estates. Mine workers abandon the tunnels. Household servants slip away in the night. They're not all gladiators. Most have never held a weapon. But they're willing to learn because the alternative is going back to chains. Spartacus sets up camp on Mount Vesuvius. Yes, that Vesuvius. Though it won't erupt and bury Pompeii for another 150 years, it's a defensive position, easily protected. The Romans send a force of 3,000 men under a praetor named Gaius Claudius Glaber. This is supposed to be a simple police action. Round up some escaped slaves, crucify them along the Via Appia as a warning, problem solved. Glaber makes camp at the base of the mountain, blocking the only obvious path down. He's got Spartacus trapped. All he has to do is wait for the rebels to starve. But Spartacus isn't just a fighter, he's a tactician. His men weave ropes from wild vines, rappel down the supposedly impassable side of the mountain, and attack Glaber's camp from behind. The Romans are caught completely off guard. It's a massacre. Glaber's forces break and run. Spartacus's army seizes their weapons, their supplies, their armor. The Senate in Rome receives the news with horror. This isn't supposed to be possible. Slaves don't beat Roman soldiers. The entire social order depends on this fundamental truth, but Spartacus just proved it wrong. What happens next is a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. Spartacus doesn't just win battles, he systematically dismantles the Roman military machine's attempts to stop him. Rome sends another force, then another. Each time, the commanders underestimate their opponent. Each time, they think they're dealing with disorganized rabble. Each time, they're wrong. Spartacus's army moves through southern Italy like a storm. They're not just raiding, they're liberating. Every estate they overrun frees more slaves. Every victory brings more weapons and supplies. The Romans have inadvertently created a feedback loop where each attempt to stop Spartacus only makes him stronger. And here's what makes this truly revolutionary. Spartacus is building more than an army. He's building a society. His camp operates on principles that are antithetical to Roman civilization. The sources tell us that Spartacus divides plunder equally among his followers. Think about that. In a world where hierarchy is everything, where your place in society is determined by birth and conquest, Spartacus creates a community based on radical equality. He is also smart about prisoners. When his forces capture Roman soldiers, they don't execute them. They force them to fight as gladiators for entertainment, turning the tables on Rome's own blood sport. It's psychological warfare of the highest order. Rome gets to watch its own citizens experience the degradation they've inflicted on countless others. The Senate finally realizes they have a genuine crisis. This isn't a slave revolt, this is a war. They appoint both consuls, the two highest-ranking officials in the Republic, to deal with the threat. Two full consular armies, the best Rome can field, march south. For a moment, it looks like Spartacus might actually win. His forces defeat the consular armies in a series of battles. Roman Italy is in panic. Trade routes are disrupted. Estates are abandoned. The wealthy flee to fortified cities. Rome hasn't been this afraid since Hannibal crossed the Alps 130 years earlier. But here's where the story gets complicated, because Spartacus faces a question that has no good answer. What now? He's won battle after battle. He's humiliated Rome. He's freed tens of thousands of slaves. But he can't actually defeat the Roman Republic. He doesn't have the resources, the infrastructure, or the strategic position. Rome has unlimited manpower, unlimited wealth, and most importantly, unlimited determination to crush this rebellion. According to the ancient historian Plutarch, Spartacus's original plan is brilliant in its simplicity. March north, cross the Alps, and disperse. His followers can return to their homelands, to Gaul, to Germania, to Thrace. They can go home as free men, but his army doesn't want to leave. Why would they? In Italy, they're powerful, they're feared. They've tasted victory and equality and brotherhood. Returning to their scattered homes means becoming small again, vulnerable again. Here, together, they're mighty. This is the tragedy at the heart of Spartacus's story. He's created something unprecedented, an army of former slaves who've proven themselves equal to any Roman legion. But that very success becomes a trap. His followers want to keep raiding, keep fighting, keep living this life of freedom and power. Spartacus tries to march north. He gets close. Some sources say he reaches the Po River Valley in northern Italy. But his army, swollen with new recruits who have no desire to leave, won't follow him beyond the Alps. Some of his subordinate commanders, men like Crixus, a Gallic gladiator, argue for staying and fighting. The coalition fractures. Crixus splits off with about 30,000 followers. He's promptly caught and killed by Roman forces, his army annihilated. It's a catastrophic loss and a grim warning of what's coming. Spartacus makes a desperate decision. If he can't escape over the Alps, he'll try a different route. He marches his army south to the toe of Italy, planning to cross to Sicily. Sicily, where a massive slave revolt had occurred just decades earlier, where the agricultural slaves might rise again to join him. He makes a deal with Cilician pirates to ferry his army across the strait. But when the time comes, the pirates take his payment and sail away. Some historians believe Rome bribed them. Others think the pirates simply took the easy money and ran. Either way, Spartacus is trapped. His army is pinned in southern Italy with the full might of Rome bearing down on them. Rome, meanwhile, has learned its lesson. No more second-rate commanders. No more underestimating the enemy. The Senate turns to Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the richest men in Rome, a hardened general who served under Sulla in the civil wars, and a man with something to prove. Crassus is fascinating in his awfulness. He's fabulously wealthy, having made his fortune through a particularly predatory form of real estate. When a building in Rome caught fire, Crassus's private fire brigade would show up and refuse to put out the flames until the owner sold him the property at a massive discount. He's ambitious, ruthless, and absolutely committed to crushing Spartacus. Crassus takes command of 8 legions, about 40,000 men, and immediately implements brutal discipline. When one of his legions breaks and runs from Spartacus's forces, Crassus revives an ancient punishment called decimation. Every 10th man in the legion is randomly selected and beaten to death by his fellow soldiers. It's a message. You should be more afraid of me than you are of the enemy. Crassus then does something clever. Instead of chasing Spartacus around the countryside, he builds a wall. a massive fortification stretching 37 miles across the narrowest point of Italy's boot, sealing off the peninsula. Trenches, palisades, watchtowers. It's an engineering marvel designed for one purpose: to trap Spartacus's army and starve them out. For weeks it works. Spartacus's forces are pinned, supplies dwindling. The Romans tighten the noose. But Spartacus isn't finished. On a snowy winter night, his forces fill a section of the ditch with earth and debris, then charge across before the Romans can react. It's a desperate gamble, and it's not completely successful. Thousands of his followers are cut down, but a significant portion of the army breaks through. They're loose in Italy again, but they're weakened, divided, desperate, and Crassus is relentless. Spring, 71 BCE. Spartacus makes his last stand in the region of Lucania in southern Italy. The exact location is lost to history, but the ancient sources give us the broad strokes. Spartacus knows this is the end. There's no escape now. Crassus has him pinned, and reinforcements are coming. Pompey the Great is returning from Spain with his legions, and Lucullus is sailing from Macedonia. If Spartacus doesn't win now, decisively, he'll be trapped between multiple Roman armies. According to Plutarch, before the battle, Spartacus's horse is brought to him. He draws his sword and kills it, saying that if he wins, he'll have plenty of Roman horses to choose from. If he loses, he won't need one. It's a moment of pure, defiant courage. A man who knows he's going to die, choosing how he'll face it. The battle is apocalyptic. Spartacus leads from the front, trying desperately to cut his way through to Crassus himself. If he can kill the Roman commander, maybe, just maybe, his army can break through and scatter. He fights like a man possessed, killing 2 centurions in personal combat. But the mathematics of warfare are merciless. Crassus has fresh troops, superior numbers, better equipment. Spartacus's army, exhausted and starving, is ground down through sheer attrition. Spartacus himself falls in the fighting. The sources tell us his body is never found, lost in the heaps of dead that cover the battlefield. Maybe that's true, or maybe the Romans found him and destroyed his corpse, afraid that his burial place might become a shrine. 6,000 of his followers are taken prisoner. Crassus has them all crucified along the Appian Way, the main road from Rome to Capua. For 120 miles, travellers pass crucified slaves, their bodies left to rot as a warning. This is what happens when you defy Rome. Another 5,000 escape north, where they run into Pompey's returning legions and are annihilated. Pompey, who barely participated in the actual fighting, manages to claim credit for finishing off the Spartacus revolt, much to Crassus's fury. The Third Servile War is over, Spartacus is dead, the largest slave revolt in Roman history has been crushed, Rome has won. But has it really? Here's the thing about Spartacus that Rome could never quite suppress. His story doesn't end with his death. In many ways, it begins there. The Romans tried desperately to minimize what happened. Official histories downplay the revolt. The Senate refuses to grant Crassus a full triumph, the highest military honor, because defeating slaves isn't considered glorious enough. They want everyone to forget this ever happened. But you can't make 70,000 crucified slaves disappear from public memory. You can't erase the terror that gripped Italy for 2 years. The rebellion left scars, psychological, economic and social, that Rome would carry for generations. And something else happened. Something the Romans never intended. Spartacus became immortal. In the ancient world, his name becomes synonymous with resistance. Scattered references in historical texts suggest that Spartacus becomes a code word, a symbol. During later slave revolts and uprisings, leaders invoke his name. But it's what happens 2,000 years later that's truly extraordinary. Spartacus transforms from a historical figure into a universal symbol of resistance against oppression. During the French Revolution, revolutionaries cite him as an inspiration. In the 1800s, abolitionists use his story to argue against slavery. In the 20th century, communist revolutionaries adopt him as a symbol. Germany's Spartacus League, led by Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, takes its name from him. The rebellion becomes art. Howard Fast's novel, blacklisted in the United States during the McCarthy era, transforms into Stanley Kubrick's epic film, itself a story of rebellion, with Kirk Douglas and screenwriter Dalton Trumbo defying the Hollywood blacklist. What the Romans feared has come to pass. Spartacus has become larger than life, more powerful dead than he ever was alive. So what's the truth about Spartacus? Here's what the ancient sources and modern archaeology tell us. He wasn't trying to overthrow the Roman Republic. He wasn't fighting to abolish slavery as an institution. He was trying to escape, to get his people out of Italy and back to their homes. The Grand Rebellion, the battles, the army of 70,000, all of that was in a sense an accident, a side effect of Rome's refusal to let enslaved people simply leave. Rome's response to the Spartacus revolt is telling. They don't reform the slave system. They don't implement protections. They don't even significantly change how gladiatorial schools operate. Instead, they just double down on terror. The message is clear. This is what happens when you resist. But here's the dark irony. That very inflexibility, that absolute refusal to see enslaved people as human beings deserving of basic rights, will eventually contribute to Rome's downfall. The Roman economy's dependence on slave labour means they need constant military expansion to capture more people. When expansion stops, the system begins to collapse. Spartacus exposed the fundamental contradiction at the heart of Roman civilization. You can't build a lasting society on human suffering. You can't create stability through pure domination. Eventually, the oppressed will rise. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. The Romans learned this lesson too late. By the time the empire fell, it had been hollowed out by centuries of inequality, corruption, and the moral bankruptcy of a system that treated human beings as property.